Hello and welcome to Grody UnPrOfEsSiOnAL. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we discuss a leader's need for knowing principle from preference and organizational insights gleaned from the quarterback calling an audible from under center. Today I am joined by a good friend of mine and a longtime co-worker at Precision Planting, Bryce Baker. Bryce, it is so good to have you here in the newly remodeled Grody UnPrOfEsSiOnAL studio.
It looks good. I don't know what it looked like before, but it looks good now.
Before, we had two sawhorses and a piece of plywood as the table. I would still have the same plywood and sawhorse table if I would not have finished the project in my basement that required that piece of plywood.
Oh, I was going to say, that's pretty appropriate for the name of the podcast.
My wife voted against another piece of plywood. She forced my hand into this Amazon desk that we're sitting
That's
at.
all right.
I'm so glad to have you in here today to talk through your leadership journey, through your experiences. Like many leaders at Precision Planting, you were part of the organization as it grew very, very rapidly and was part of the daily balancing act, the daily wrestling through how do you maintain a startup culture? How do you maintain an early energy, close to the customer organization while it grows rapidly, grows globally, grows in every direction? I'm so excited to hear your vantage point, your perspectives, your thoughts on that. But before we get to that, a lot of people that work at Precision Planting were born on farms. I don't fall into that category. I was born on a quarter-acre Kentucky bluegrass farm in the suburbs of St. Louis. And yourself, you also were not born on a farm.
Yep, that's right.
But there's probably as much or more agriculture in your veins than anybody that has been born on a farm. You were connected with farming and with agriculture from a very young age. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. You know, I don't know exactly where it came from. My grandparents farmed in Wisconsin, but they retired from farming before I was born.
Okay.
So there was a farm that they resided on for a number of years, but it was not a farm that was active. I think just being in central Illinois, there was farming all around, and really was a love for equipment that I had from a very young age.
Right. And if I remember correctly, one of your favorite childhood activities was to memorize product marketing slicks from ag equipment. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. So anytime we would go on a trip, go to see grandparents in Wisconsin or just go anywhere, I'd always beg my parents, hey, let's stop at every equipment dealer, no matter the brand, no matter whatever. Just stop at every equipment dealer, and I would essentially just get one of every product brochure.
Right.
Sit in the car and read them. I kept them. I still have some. I think the oldest one that I have, I grabbed when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
It got to the point where my sisters will tell jokes that when I was 3-4 years old, we'd be driving down the road and I'd say, oh, look at that 4320 John Deere over there. Look at that 4430. And they'd say, what? What are you talking about? I don't even see a tractor. I'm like, that over there. Oh, that little green. And I would be able to kind of tell what they were based on the configuration of something like the exhaust or the air intake or the color or the way the cab was shaped from a far distance. It's been a historic pastime of mine that I still continue today in some degree.
To know your ag equipment from hundreds of feet away.
That's right.
Are there any product catalogs that you distinctly remember that stand out from your childhood?
Yeah, so quite a few. One I would pick would be a John Deere 60 series tractor brochure.
Okay.
So like the 4560, the 4760, and the 4960. It was called Fine Tuned Perfection. Mm-hmm. That one just distinctly stands out. I still have it. It's on a shelf at home in the office. Well worn by this time, but that's one that stands out.
That's awesome. As you came into the ag industry, you started in a field sales role.
Yep.
Then have transitioned into the role of a marketing manager. Talk me through that progression. Did one lead to the other? How are they different from one another?
Yeah, I would say it's been extremely beneficial for me in the position that I'm in now to have the sales history.
Yeah.
I think having the sales history in the same organization in which you're in marketing especially is very helpful because sales and marketing need to work hand in hand.
Yes.
When they work hand in hand, it's a good handoff from awareness and interest down the funnel to working with, in our case, dealers to close deals, educate the customer, help them understand why they're buying the product. I've observed in other businesses, you can kind of have this rift where it's like, well, marketing doesn't know what's going on. They don't know what actually is happening in the field. And so I think a blessing I've had to be able to kind of bridge that gap of understanding what it was like in the field. But having some of that allows me to speak into the marketing team that I'm able to lead and say, hey, from the perspective of sales, here's how we think about that. The other thing that I've learned is that while sales and marketing need to work hand in hand, they are different.
Okay.
And so while a sales team is working, I would say, deeper into product knowledge, deeper into the journey of the customer as they move closer to a purchase. And even I would say in our case, the sales team works after the purchase to make sure they understand how to use a product or so on. If marketing is doing the same thing, we're not necessarily getting new interest. One of the things that I did early on in moving to the marketing role was just try to sort out what's the appropriate way to speak to a customer at a different point in their interaction with the company, with a product, with a dealer. If you give too much information early, it can be overwhelming. If you don't give enough information late, it can lead people to not have confidence in the business, the support they're going to receive, or that you know the product well.
You're describing this continuum of a person in society that has never heard of your product, never heard of your brand, never heard of anything about you, to the person that is a die-hard, dyed-in-the-wool customer that is going to buy everything that you ever come out with. What you're describing is that marketing is not simply about producing tools to support the sales organization in making better contact with the people that we already know. There's a scouting aspect to get to the highways and byways, to get beyond the relationships of the sales organization and really act to draw in people. Ultimately, they're going to come and connect with the sales organization, but it's to set your magnetic sights beyond just the current customer to draw in a new customer. Is that how you would describe it?
Yes, that is correct. In some ways, you can make an analogy to a relationship.
Okay.
You talked about this continuum. Let's just take a spouse, for example. When you first met that person, the conversation was different than when you're married. If all of a sudden you just start dumping all this personal stuff when you first meet, it's like, whoa, that's a lot to consume.
Right.
However, if after you're married, you're still superficially saying, hey, my favorite color is blue and I enjoy riding my bike, and that's all you talk about, you're not going deep. The analogy there would be an existing customer. If you're only saying top level things about things they already know, you're not communicating with them appropriately. And so you got to figure out where along the relationship spectrum and the knowledge spectrum someone is, and then communicate appropriately.
You would say there's not a literal day that a potential customer is handed from the marketing domain into the sales domain. But in general, are you describing the early dating side of the relationship is really where marketing probably is more focused, and the closing, the curating, and the crafting, that the deep connectedness part of the relationship really falls more in the domain of the sales? There's a handoff somewhere along there, but in general, the focus is aimed that way. Is that how you
exactly.
describe it?
I would say one way to say it is you go from 80-20 to 20-80, sales marketing versus marketing sales.
What are some common mistakes that you see marketing organizations can fall into?
One is metrics being the driver. Not that metrics aren't important, but that they are the driver and they actually replace connection and understanding with the customer.
Yeah.
I would say also making talking to a customer an event. If talking to a customer becomes an event as opposed to something that you do on a regular basis or is baked into how you enable the team, how the folks on the team operate, you kind of get to this point where, hey, once a year, we're going to talk to customers and we're going to learn. And because it's an event, you may not actually get real deep and the real outcome Whereas if you're continually talking to customers along the way, you get more regular feedback, more regular insights.
The metrics one is really fascinating because as an organization grows, there is a temptation to say talking to any one person or talking to any 5 people doesn't represent, quote unquote, the customer base. And so I need a way to understand the customer base. The easiest way or the most logical way or the most cost-effective way is to do that through a survey. Mm-hmm. You highlight a really important point, which is to say we've always viewed that type of information, whether it be marketing information, whether it be customer information, that's a windsock that you should be aware of.
Yep.
But it's far from being detailed enough to set the course off of it. You can't hand the decisions over to the data. You have to have someone that's able to discern the data and cross-reference it to conversations with growers, cross-reference it to industry information. If you did a survey, the average American has 1 breast and 1 testicle.
Yep, that's right.
But you'll never find the average American measuring the wrong thing. You will actually conclude something that isn't even real.
I have learned a ton from surveys. So it's not that they're bad or they're unusable. That's not at all what either of us are saying here. But it's to say you get the survey results back and then you make a unilateral decision on that based on only data. Mm-hmm. That's wrong. There have been survey results that have driven us over time to seek to understand a little bit more.
Yeah.
You find this metric and you're like, interesting. Why is that? Because you don't know why people answered that way. So then getting deeper into why do they answer that way helps you understand, what do I do about it? What decision do I make?
Right.
So it's the combination that is helpful.
So you're saying the survey actually may highlight the need to go collect more information, targeted information, rather than the survey leading to the decision.
100%.
That gets to your second point, which is you shouldn't make talking to the customer an event. And you use the example, once a year we bring customers in, we wine them, we dine them, and then we sit down with them and we talk to them about a set questionnaire or a set number of things that we want to learn about. My own experience is bringing someone from their environment into your environment and then asking them a set of questions that fit your constructs, fit your metrics, fit your categories of thinking. You get very little actionable information oftentimes. Going to their environment, and I would say more than conversing with them, you're also observing them.
Yes.
You're observing what they're doing, how they do it, and it gives you the opportunity that while they're doing an action, you can say the question, why are you doing that? Mm-hmm. And they will give you a more authentic and a more insightful answer than if that same question happened in your office.
Yeah, I agree. That's been my experience in their context. I think context, especially in marketing, is a big thing. And when it comes to having customers inform what you're doing, being in their context to gather that information is the best place I've seen to do it.
Mm-hmm. The other part is it's not just a select few employees within the organization that should have access to the customer. It's everyone. It was very important that we didn't just take the head of marketing or the head of engineering or the head of sales and say, you go spend time with the customer. We actually focused from day one of an employee joining the organization to know the customer, to be with the customer.
Yeah, I've taken it as far in past years that literally it is a goal to talk to a customer, to talk to a dealer, to spend a few days out there so that it's something that kind of is more official than it's a good idea.
Yep.
It's something that for you to be more effective at your role, it's important for you to do.
One of the topics that has really emerged in the marketing domain over the last many years is tailored marketing. Talk to me about the pitfalls and the benefits that you see in focusing on tailoring marketing to the customer.
As we think about tailored marketing, I think there's multiple ways broadly to think about it. So I'm a fan of, like I said earlier, context. What that means is that you're taking the time to make sure that what you're showing or saying is the appropriate context to who's viewing it. So here could be some potential pitfalls. In ag, the equipment used across different places within a country or within different countries varies widely. So if we were to take a photo from a North American farm field and put the same photo in some marketing material in Western Europe, it's going to fall flat.
It'd be no different than showing a vacation photo in a Fiat in the Italian Alps as if they were in California.
Exactly. So appropriate images, appropriate copy for who's going to view it. And so in some cases, depending on how tailored you're getting, you're actually better off to go more general if you're not highly tailored. If you're running something that's going to be seen all across the US where there's many practices, you probably need something very general, because if you use imagery that is specific, and they're going to look at it and say, that doesn't apply to me.
Sure.
One of the other challenges with tailoring is making sure that your data is correct.
Yes.
I have an example of this. I'm sure you have some too. There's a broadband company that I get mailers from. And over the years, we've tried 3 times to have their broadband installed at our home. The technician comes out to install and basically says, hey, there's some trees between you and where the signal comes from. We're out in the country. I don't feel I in good faith can install this. You won't have good signal. You won't have good internet. And I'm very thankful that all 3 times they've said that. However, I still continue to get the promotion to have it installed at my house. So the mailers keep coming. I know the service technically is available here, but employees of the same company have said it's not going to work. That's one where continuing to tailor in the service area, but where it doesn't actually work, actually is just frustrating to me as a consumer.
In 2018, I bought an electric vehicle. 2018, it's not the earliest electric vehicles that were ever sold, but it was still pretty early. From the day I walked onto the dealership, I could tell they weren't quite comfortable with selling it and with explaining it and with talking to it. And so I ended up buying it, enjoy the vehicle, good vehicle. There's been multiple times where, hey, you sell a vehicle, you want to connect them with the service organization,
of course,
right? Because you want to continue the relationship. You want to continue the customer experience. And so I've gotten multiple coupons from this organization offering me a free oil change for a vehicle that has no engine.
Right.
And the coupon is so specific that it actually says only for this VIN number. So I can't even take my other vehicles, because you could argue, hey, this person probably has multiple vehicles. They probably aren't all electric. Maybe they want to use our service organization for other. And so, no, it's specific to the VIN number. And that's an example where tailoring, it actually is a step back. The customer actually looks and says, man, you guys, that doesn't make any sense. This is actually now a weird experience rather than a positive experience that you're hoping to create.
Yeah, I think another weird experience you can create would be kind of under the guise of this principle: just because you can or you're able to doesn't mean you should. When folks finance things, that becomes public record. From an equipment perspective, you can know the make, model, and year of equipment in some cases. If a entity, a business that you did not buy something from is sending you marketing messages calling out the thing that you own, people could say, how did they get that?
Yes.
This is creepy.
Yes.
You got to understand your industry. You got to understand the customer. In agriculture, generally, farmers will see that as a little bit more intrusive.
Yes.
That's the culture that generally exists in agriculture. Here's the other thing is, back to your example, what if you're wrong? My suggestion would be the more you go down the rabbit hole of tailoring specific to an individual, you need to make sure you have the utmost confidence that what you're doing is correct and appropriate to do that successfully.
Building upon tailoring, as you and I have been at Precision Planting, and we talked about a lot of growth, not just in the US, but customers globally. How do you balance customization with standardization as the customer base gets broader and broader?
You know, growing up in the U.S., I didn't have any study abroad. I've had minimal experience outside of the U.S., so I needed to learn quite a bit. This is where surveys were very helpful. There have been surveys where you ask the exact same questions about what does the customer care about? And you find out that in different countries, different continents, those answers come back very, very different. When you see that the same question is answered differently across regions, all of a sudden, trying to balance this, how much do I tailor versus how do we scale and be effective? And then deciding what are the things that are at a brand level, brand promise. You're not going to drastically change what you say about your brand and what you're trying to achieve with a customer on
What would
their
a
behalf.
brand promise example be?
Yeah, so it would be something like improvement of an operation could be a brand promise.
Okay.
Insurance companies, it's we're there when you need us. You're in good hands.
Sure.
We're like a neighbor.
So in that advertisement, they're not talking about a specific product. They're not
Correct.
talking about a specific offering. They're just positioning their brand
Correct.
as we are there with you.
Correct.
Yep.
And so that should be consistent because that's what do you want that customer to think of with the brand. Now, as you get into a specific product offering, let's say there's a product that can do multiple things. You may actually then regionally decide to pick one of those three attributes and bring that to the forefront depending on what you've learned about customers and what resonates with them in that area.
Talk to me a little bit about that organizationally. As you move to more and more diversity in the customers, do you keep a central hub that is making these decisions of where to go brand, where to go feature, or to what degree do you have regional or local connectivity?
My experience is if there are folks making very specific decisions down to the imagery and the exact copy to be used from countries away, you're most likely to miss something.
Sure. No matter where your headquarters is, if you're trying to
Doesn't matter.
tailor to an audience you've never met,
Correct.
doesn't matter where you're from.
Correct. At the same time, if there is a customer who sees your brand in multiple countries and it's so different in look, in feel, in promise that they're confused if it's the same business,
Yeah.
you've also gone too much decentralized.
Yep.
What I've seen as probably the optimal is you've got to have some centralized control over the high level look, feel, high level message, but then the tailoring should happen by people who are intimately involved with a given region and then carry out and make those plans at the regional level.
Yeah. The phrase I've heard used, and I forget where I originally heard it, but is you're looking to have a loosely coupled organization.
Yes.
These organizations, whether it's, and this is marketing, this is product management, this is engineering, it's really any organization that is trying to be creative, trying to grow, trying to find new opportunity, but also have enough structure to not collapse under chaos, is you're looking to have an organization that is loosely coupled. And those two things compete against each other in every decision. To your point, it's difficult to describe in the abstract, but by describing it as being loosely coupled, it is to say there are certain components that really do need to be centrally, not governed, but at least centrally communicated, centrally decided, that all of the team understands, hey, these are the non-negotiables of our brand. These are the non-negotiables of our product. But then also other aspects that allow for local decisions to be made. I had this thought. This is a new analogy that's probably only about 5 minutes old here. Let's consider the NFL for a second. A quarterback is given a play by the offensive coordinator as they go into a given huddle. The huddle breaks. The defense is set up now. You can watch the defensive positions that everybody's in. That's an example of a loosely coupled organization. There are quarterbacks that have the ability to read the situation and change the play based off of what they see happening locally. The decision for the play by the offensive coordinator was made 2 minutes ago. New information has now presented itself, which may change what is the right or wrong thing to do. I was wrestling through this. There's 30 NFL quarterbacks. I am certain they are not all equally able to discern the situation that is presented before them and make a right adjustment. And so I'm certain in 30 organizations, there is a different degree of autonomy given to the quarterback from the offensive coordinator. And there's so many components that play into that. There's the experience of the offensive coordinator. There's the personality of the offensive coordinator. There's the experience and the track record of the quarterback. There's the personality of the quarterback. Like, let's pick someone like Patrick Mahomes, thought of as one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. I've seen in an interview him say, I have seen every defense. There's nothing in my career that surprises me anymore on the defensive side of the ball. I may not have seen that literal play, but I know the scheme that it's in. I know the intent that it is. I know where that guy's most likely to go. You can look at that organization and say, man, they have a really highly effective coach in Andy Reid. They have a really highly effective offensive coordinator, and they have a highly effective quarterback. There's probably a lot of opportunity that Patrick Mahomes is given for autonomy to read the play and adjust on the fly. But because he's given the autonomy does not mean that a brand new rookie quarterback in another system should be given the exact same autonomy. And so as I think about this loosely coupled organization, it is to say there is the allowance of autonomy. There is the allowance of tailoring. But that allowance is earned.
Yes. Yep.
That doesn't mean that you just widely say, hey, all quarterbacks make all calls every time we snap the ball. It is to say within our organization, there are people that they change the play, and their history and their track record has proven that 95% of the time it's the right call. I'm not going to lynch them on the interception. I may ask them what they saw or why they saw it or why they went that direction. To some, they just want to take it to the extreme and say, well, everybody gets autonomy and they're just free-floating molecules through the universe and you just given over to complete chaos. And others say, man, you just got to lock it all down. But as I've watched and thought through, I think that audible example and specifically comparing 30 different quarterbacks and the autonomy that they're given based on their history and their experience, I think that's a helpful construct, at least for me, to think about what a properly functioning, loosely coupled organization could be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's kind of the concept of decentralized command, but in decentralized command, there's still command.
Correct.
So there's still a centralized decision being made. It's just not, well, we do whatever that centralized said all the time.
Correct.
So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Let's transition from kind of marketing as a category to your leadership journey specifically. You are a very detail-oriented person. On top of that, you have the ability to think in the strategic and philosophical domain as well as simultaneously to think at the tactical layer of conversations. As you've transitioned into leadership, what are the difficulties? What are the roadblocks that show up as you transition from an individual contributor into leadership?
So we kind of talked about my history a little bit from a field sales perspective into marketing. And so one of the additional layers I'll talk about a little bit is having 15 years plus in the same organization. You learn some things, you know some things, and you have some ideas. One of the things I've had to learn is balancing what I believe is right. Is that based on a principle or a preference of mine?
Yeah.
Because if it's based on a principle, like let's use an example. Somebody's creating something and something is stated incorrectly. Obviously, that's a principle. You're not going to say, well, I want to give them the autonomy to make a decision. Now, let's say there's something that you say, I wouldn't have done it that way. I don't know that I love it, but there's no true principle, fact that is incorrect about what's being done. You got to use discernment, and in some cases, when it's right, let them roll with that, because you could be wrong, right? If we're talking about preferences, you got to consider you could be wrong too. I've also found that because I've just got a lot of experience in the organization, like I said, 15 years and counting, I can provide many answers when people need them. But one of the things I've had to learn transitioning is I need to not, quote unquote, rescue it's not a true rescue,
Sure.
but it's this situation where if all of a sudden I'm the answer man for everybody on the team because I can be, then they're not seeking out others. If I am the hub for people on my team or the whole team because I have answers, I'm not necessarily helping them develop the skill to work cross-functionally and go seek those out.
Right. Another way to look at it is the organization will never grow to be larger than you.
Correct.
And that means larger than your calendar. That means larger than your preferences. That means larger than your experiences. And you can see this not just in departments, you can see it in entire companies when all decisions have to go across the table of the head guy. Decisions stack up because you can't get to the table with the head guy.
Which ironically leads to overwhelm.
Correct.
For that head guy, especially when you're of a personality that wants things done right.
Yes.
And wants things done well. You just have to let that go. And in some cases, that may be that you're allowing people to struggle. They're going to have to flex. And instead of you saving them, you're saying, here's where you should go. And you let them go figure it out. So that's something kind of as I've transitioned into leadership, have figured out I don't need to do it all. And I shouldn't do it all. And actually, it's good if I don't.
I love the preference versus principle comparison. You know, I think a lot of talented individual contributors that arrive and rise into leadership typically have very good principles. They have very good calibration of experiences that the organization values and that the organization promotes, essentially. As a leader, how do you decide which one is a principle and which one is a preference? Because I think oftentimes our preference list is way shorter than it should be, and our principle list is way longer than it should be. Were there any things that you've done as a leader to help you figure out in situ, is this a principle or is this a preference?
That is a hard one to answer. One thing that's coming to mind would be wrestling through the question, what's the worst thing that happens? If the worst thing that happens is minimal, then it's most likely a preference. If I, thinking very logically, believe that the worst thing that can happen is it's egg on the company's face,
right,
and a PR nightmare, that's probably a principle. You probably need to say something. You probably need to step in. It's an art. This is one that's not science. There's probably not a book that you read that gives you the answer. I guarantee you there's many books you can read that help you refine the art.
Right.
And there are many people you can observe to help you refine the art, but it is an art. And I would say just, situation by situation, you got to think wisely and do your best to discern and understand you'll probably be wrong sometimes.
Yeah, the one I would add to the list is finding someone else in the organization that is maybe different on the spectrum on principle versus preference. So if you're a leader that is highly, highly principled, find a leader who is successful that is more, hey, this is preference. I let my people try this. I let my people try this. It was easier for me to learn through the experiences of other leaders. I was tempted to say, man, this guy is laissez-faire. He lets anything go. Rather than just viewing it that way from a distance, actually approaching the person humbly and saying, hey, I'm wrestling through principle versus preference. There are some things that I'm really interested to understand the inside baseball of your decisions. And if you phrase it that way as a compliment and as a curiosity, rather than a what the heck are you thinking, right. I have found that many people are willing to respond in kind and say, hey, no, I don't know all the answers, but my experiences have been this and this. It was a lot easier for me, at least, to observe the counter of my behavior in others and then ask them, how do you go about it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That has been something that's been very helpful because you don't want to just rely on your own intuition all the time. You want to make sure that it's calibrated. So a unique thing just for me in my journey and the team I'm able to lead is there are many of them that are doing things I have close to zero or actually zero capability in, which is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, because I don't have talent at graphic design or video editing or those things, I can sometimes tend to be, I don't know how to do it, so therefore I shouldn't give input. But the other side of that is, yes, but ultimately it's my responsibility if I don't give input and something is a principle and I don't address it because I feel, well, if I'm not skilled at it, I shouldn't speak my mind about it. And so that's been a unique balance. The other thing is then the things that you are able to do, but are leading others to do, you can tend to hone in on those and be a lot more critical or give a lot more feedback on those things because you did know how to do them, where there's other aspects of what you're leading you have no idea on. You can go laissez-faire on some and over the top with others. And so you got to figure out that appropriate balance.
Yes. That's where the principle and the preference list are completely tipped the other way. If an employee on your team is doing something or demonstrating a skill that you have no experience in, most likely your preference list is really, really short.
Right.
Because you've never done it before. I've often said one of the hardest jobs to have is the job that your boss used to do, because they believe in their mind that they could still do it in their spare time.
Right.
And they want you to do it exactly the way they did. And I think this principle and preference mindset helps us as leaders not be that guy that nobody wants the role that you used to have.
Yeah, one of the worst stories I've ever heard. A person was doing something and their boss said, stand up, let me do it. Sat down in their chair, used their computer to do what this person had been trying to do. And as that story had been relayed to me, it was just a completely disheartening, disengaging experience where I'm sure the leader, I mean, you have to assume they thought they were being helpful.
Right.
But it actually was the exact opposite.
Right. Bryce, a little bit over a year ago, you actually made another transition in leadership. And it's a transition that I think a lot of people underestimate the complexity of. Mm-hmm. And that's moving from being a leader of individual contributors to a leader of leaders. I think a lot of people recognize, hey, I'm moving into leadership. I should probably pay attention. I should probably take a class. I should probably read a book. It's a little bit of a hidden trap to move from a leader of individual contributors to a leader of leaders. Talk to me about your journey, the lessons you've learned moving from leader of individual contributors to a leader of leaders.
Yeah, I would echo something I've heard you say a lot over the years, have heard you say on previous episodes, is that leadership is a skill, and leadership of different levels are different skills. One thing I've had to learn is that when someone asks me a question, so I talked earlier about sometimes I have all the answers, there are now times when, because there's a leader on my team leading a group, they ask me the question and I'm like, I have no idea. I'm saying someone outside of the marketing team, let's say, ask me a question. Hey, what are we doing in blah, blah, blah? And literally, I have no idea.
And you have to be comfortable in that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so it was very difficult at first to be comfortable in that.
Because you would feel as if you were letting other people down or that you weren't doing your job.
Correct.
Right.
Well, if it's happening on my team, I should be aware, right? Not necessarily. The second thing I would say that I've had to learn and work through with some of the leaders I've been leading is there's this concept, read it in a book by Mark Manson. It's this concept of responsibility and fault. So to explain kind of what's said in the book is, if I run a stop sign and hit somebody with my car, I'm at fault and I'm responsible for damages. But in a different realm, responsibility and fault are decoupled. So what I mean by that is, if I clearly explain, hey, here's what needs done, do you understand what I'm asking you to do? And then someone goes and executes it completely wrongly. New leaders have sometimes been like, this is my fault. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by fault is they felt guilt, shame, and like they were wrong in the situation. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say it's good in those situations to ask yourself, did I miscommunicate? Yep. Did I not communicate?
Take an extreme ownership
perspective. But if it's like, well, I don't know that there was. I think a person just totally did something wrong, to say, okay, don't feel guilt and shame about that. You're not at fault, but you're responsible.
Yeah.
You're responsible to figure that out. And so for high ownership people, for folks that like to have things done right, that have a more perfectionistic personality, I think that decoupling some of those things can help them grow, because when you're leading leaders, you need to help them lead their team. And if they feel fault, they're more likely to say, well, I'm not going to delegate to the team. And that's actually not helping them develop their leadership skill.
That's really good. As you transition from individual contributor to leader, and then as you transition to leader of leaders, a lot of it depends on kind of what was your playbook at each step is what's going to define what are you going to struggle with at each step. You know, as I look at myself, I've heard my leadership style is as the submarine captain, right? You are in the thick of it all the time with the crew. And oftentimes you're the first one up. You could, in a pinch, step in and do anything in that submarine because you've experienced it. You were a submariner before you became a submarine captain. You're the last one to eat. You're the last one to go to bed. You're able to fill in. You care deeply about each of the individuals. And early in my work into leadership, man, that's an asset. People are bought in. People are connected. They're putting in extra effort in those ways. But as the captaincy moves to an admiralty, it becomes impossible.
Yep.
It becomes impossible to be in every submarine. It becomes impossible to be on every boat, to be on every team. For me, that was a stretching beyond capability, a stretching beyond capacity, really. And I had to wrestle through, what does it look like to be a leader? The team knows you would if you could.
Yes.
Rather than the team knows you do.
Yes.
It wasn't that I was like prideful in that. I don't think. It wasn't that I was trying to be proving that I was the best submariner. It was that I felt like I was under-caring for people by not being able, not that I wasn't willing, but not being able to be in every conversation, to be at every place. That was one. The other one that I would say snuck up on me is the impact of the stripes on the shoulder.
Okay.
When I would sit in a room as an individual contributor, I could speak freely. I could give my perspective and I could give my opinion. And the room really could decide whether those ideas were good or bad based off of their merits, based off of their opinion of me. I was able to do more out loud, free-form brainstorming as an individual contributor. But once you become a leader of leaders and you have enough brass on your shoulder, the organization doesn't know that you're brainstorming. You said it, and we're going to do it. And I've actually had to grow and mature in keeping my mouth shut. To this point, preference versus principle. If the discussion around the table is in the space of a principle, I agree. You need to open your mouth, you need to talk, and you need to say, hey guys, this is the guardrails principally that we need to watch out for. But a lot of it was when it came into the preference place, it's actually counterproductive for me to even voice my preference. And there are times where the right thing as a leader is you're sitting at the end of the table, everybody looks to you and say, what should we do? And the right answer, even though you have in your head the exact play that we should run, the right answer is to say, what do you guys think? How would you do this?
Yeah, I've had to learn that. I've messed up plenty of times.
Sure.
Understanding if you want discussion, stay quiet, because the room interprets whatever you say when you offer an opinion as a principle,
as a directive,
and as a directive as opposed to an opinion. So therefore saying, hey, I want to have a discussion about XYZ topic. Here's what I think about it. What do you guys think? You might as well be done.
Yes.
In that instance, we should have a discussion about XYZ topic. I want to hear what you guys think is the right way to do, your ideas. There's a Simon Sinek book with the title Leaders Eat Last. And I think probably an appropriate book title could be Leaders Speak Last.
Yes.
There are times where a leader needs to provide, this is what we're doing. And that's appropriate in some situations. The hang up is when you truly want feedback, but you talk first, you're done. You're not going to get the feedback.
And as a leader, I personally need an environment to brainstorm. Mm-hmm. I need a place that I can close the door with certain people in the organization, and we can just throw stuff against the wall to see what sticks. But what I had to learn the hard way is there's more rooms in which you can't do that.
Correct.
Than there are rooms in which you can do that.
Correct.
One last place I want to spend some time is on corporate culture.
Okay.
You and I, part of Precision Planting for a lot of years, the area that you and I most lived was in that phase, coming out of the founder phase and into that building and exploring phase. Some of the things that you and I have most connected on and most discussed over the years is how do you retain that startup elasticity, that ability to take risk, that ability to take the shot. Mm-hmm. But you got to have some structure. You got to have some rigidity. You got to have some processes that show up. You just crossed your 15th anniversary at Precision Planting.
That's right.
And on your 15th anniversary, you wrote a LinkedIn post, and it was the 15 things that I've learned at Precision Planting over the 15 years. As I was reading it, just so many memories rushed back. There was a couple of them that I just wanted to read out and just chat through your experiences. These are not necessarily where organizations end up culturally, but they're things that we held on to with a death grip to keep them that way. And one of them is a fear of failure will hold you back. You said at Precision Planting, we use intelligent failure to learn and that we reward intelligent failure. How do you keep that as an organization?
The culture of Precision Planting is awesome. And there's been a lot of transitions and things that we've been able to just kind of personify and keep this culture intact and continue on with it. Intelligent failure is what we call it. So some places I've seen it is one where you spent your time mostly was R&D. Yeah. And so it was inspiring to see how R&D is allowed to, it's not make mistakes, it's not be reckless, it's none of those things. But it's to say if you experiment and try something and it doesn't work, awesome. Try a different way. So as I watch the R&D organization, it's really exciting to just see the experimentation that's allowed. And there are products that would not exist today had doing it a way that didn't work not been allowed to happen. As I think about my personality, one of the things I've thought about with this cultural concept is that for my personality, a little less risk-oriented, if I were in a culture of fear, I would probably just reproduce and do the same things that have worked in the past.
Yes.
We're not even talking about making a huge mistake. We're just talking about do something that doesn't work out. Like we're talking about it's not negligence. It's just, oops, that promotion didn't quite go right. And so been blessed to work with a group of individuals who don't get hammered for each thing that doesn't work out.
That's a great way to say it. Is
there accountability? Absolutely. But not in the whose fault is it? Who's going to pay? That type of thing.
Yep.
It's okay. That didn't work. Let's try not to make that mistake again. What's a new way forward?
Yep. I love how you're describing that. A lot of organizations, if we go back to the quarterback and audible analogy, one interception is the end of your career. As long as you run every single play that the offensive coordinator calls exactly as he called it, you're not accountable to the interception. You can just point to the guy above you and say, he told me to do it.
Right.
Again, you can't go to complete chaos and give every quarterback the freedom of calling audibles on every single play. But the organization that did not fear failure was an organization that did not, to your point, look to blame every single thing that went wrong to an individual.
Correct.
Absolutely, there are times where we called audibles and we threw an interception. But as the quarterback comes off the field, the quarterback is not blaming the rest of the team. The quarterback is looking at the tape. How are we going to not do that again? And it was this great experience. I think the first 3 years that I was the head of R&D, I had to go to the business for a $1 million recall. The business was not hundreds of millions of dollars at that time.
Right.
We moved very quickly. We launched products very aggressively. Our target audience was the early adopter, the guy, the gal who was willing to take some lumps and bumps and still go to the coffee shop and be extremely excited that they were the only one that got to use it. But part of that early adopter is they expect that if something goes wrong, you're going to be there to fix it. And that's who we have been as Precision Planting, is the move fast, move early with the early adopters, and take care to make sure that it turns out right. 3 years in a row, it was quite expensive to make it right. My previous experience, if you showed up to the executive team with $1 million recall, somebody's career has to be over.
Sure.
As I approached the broader organization and said, we got to make this recall, the organization brought with it a more holistic view that said, okay, well, we launched the product faster than we would have otherwise. We took this risk here. This thing went well. And yeah, a byproduct is that we have this recall. The interesting part about an organization is it's not just me that saw that happened.
Right.
50 other engineers, 20 salespeople, 20 people in support saw, hey, we won. We didn't go undefeated. Right. There were some flaws, but nobody lost their job.
Right.
Nobody's career is over. I'm still percolating on this audible analogy. Employees earned the right to call audibles, and they were not penalized if an interception resulted, but they learned from it. And the next play down went well. It's a hard balance. And I know that some listening come from organizations with zero tolerance for risk. And it sounds like the words that get said are the only other choice is this absolute chaos where anybody can make a mistake. And man, it seems like the business would just spiral completely out of control if you went there. Yes, if you went that far, it would completely spiral out of control. You said it. It's not as if there's no accountability, but it is to say that there's not this binary decision that has to be made of was that a success or was it a failure. It allowed for more nuance into the strategy behind the decision and what was the aim of the decision, what was the upside if it went well, what was the cost, how do we mitigate the downside. All of those aspects were allowed in the calculus that large organizations just don't. It's like it went well or it went bad. You're either promoted or you're fired. And so that fear of failure, it was how failure was treated.
Correct.
That allowed for the organization to not be afraid of failure.
Yeah, I found that as we've discussed with people outside the precision planting organization about this idea of failure, but it's a little bit challenging and it's very nuanced because people say, wait, failure is part of your culture? The way we say it is using intelligent failure to learn. The language and the description is really important. We're not talking about a mistake. We're not talking about negligence. We're not talking about a decision that was made in a vacuum with no other input that was stupid. We're really talking about just the freedom to try things without repercussion, discipline. We may do something and say, hey, that was about 50% right. From there, how do you get it closer up to that 100% right? This ability to incrementally improve, it's using intelligent failure where you're purposefully knowing you're not going to be 100% right, but it's in the spirit of trying new things, innovating, and making a better product defined as it could be the physical product that a company is making, or it could be the marketing product or the product support experience or the finance experience interacting with a dealer. Like, those as products.
And in each instance, as you said, the person, that first iteration might be 50% right. Where I've seen it be most successful in this intelligent failure is when the person who's the head or the driver of that experience is candid and humble and communicates not just what went right, but also what went wrong and what improvements are going to be made with it. Being able to communicate, hey, this went well, this didn't go well, and here's what we're going to do about it. That garners the trust of the rest of the organization to say, yeah, there were some rough edges, but they're aware of them. they're going to continue to improve them, and we're going to keep moving forward. And that's kind of the give and take of intelligent failure. Bryce, I can't thank you enough for spending the time to come over, share your experiences, share your passions, share the lessons that you've learned in leadership over the years. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. Good to spend some time with you and talk on these topics. They're really important.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks.
For anyone that would like to send comments, accolades, or gifts in kind, you can reach me via my email, justin@grody.io. If, after listening to this episode, you still believe you represent the average American, please turn off your podcast player and seek medical assistance. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.